What is the nutrient management strategy of the farm, and how have you reduced external harmful and non-renewable inputs? You are really replying to all of the questions.
Yeah, like I said, it's when I was reading that I got a little bit frustrated because I've said it in
because this is the place where it's all incorporated.
Yeah,
anyway,
we are recycling the local resources. We're keeping them dynamic within the system because of the activity of the microbes, the plants and the animals. The loop is closed. We do not have to import that much. I can put that into context a little bit, because what they want is a nutrient budgeting thing. Well, here's my nutrient budget thing. If I measure the organic matter levels in my soil, we know how much mineralized is out of there, so that's how much food, plant food becomes available out of there. You don't even need soil tests. So then, on average, over the property, we're sitting over the property, because there are spots where it differentiates, which again, this relates to uniformity, but we're sitting over 5% of organic matter. If you provide the right conditions for the free ecosystem services, and the cornerstone ones, the key ones, is mineralization, done by a set of microbes, a microbial food web, and humification, done by another set of microbial food web in the soil, then if you have 5%, you produce more nutrients, you keep more nutrients mobile, biologically, ecologically living, turning over, then what is required for intensive greedy crops like broccoli and cabbages and stuff. So we have that, yeah, and we maintain that, and we try, if it drops in a certain area, to change the microbial plant animal community so that it brings it back up again, which is in a way a simple exercise. But that's what we do, hence we do not buy inputs. Fact of the matter is that the people that buy from us have to understand that sometimes you get a broccoli that size, and sometimes you get a broccoli that size. So uniformity is gone.
So in fact you haven't had to reduce external harmful and non-renewable inputs because they never...
Well, we took over a conventional property, so I dropped most of the things immediately. Having said that, we do compromise here and there a little bit, and that mostly relates to the orchard, because in the orchard we've got varieties that are not actually genetically suitable for the Wairarapa.
Okay, what is the nutrient management strategy of the farm, and how have you reduced external harmful and non-renewable inputs?
Yeah, we sort of covered that a little bit. What is the nutrient management? Well, the nutrient management is basically to recycle everything on farm, the natural resources that we do create, and we create a lot, and else get the resources locally, else it's not really ecological. Having said that, I think that way. Most people don't think that way. That question arises because of conventional farming being based on inputs, which is a silly notion if you know what the resources are on the farm. And we talked about that we used organic matter on organic matter levels. I was saying that we had 5% of organic matter, and that gives us enough nutrients out of there to feed a greedy crop. So our nutrient management is really to keep the organic matter levels high enough, and there's various ways of doing that, and the techniques you can find out, they're all over the place. But in essence it comes down to, when I was talking about 5.5%, I was taking the average over the whole property, and it used to be all orchard, so when we changed over from orchard to market garden, we did it gradually. So an orchard is basically a pastoral system, and a pastoral system builds up organic matter levels if indeed you have legumes in there like clover and stuff. So the first bit of orchard that we turned into market garden, when we turned it into market garden, it was sitting around 6.5% organic matter. Yeah. So that in essence means it has built up organic matter levels over the years. It has provided us with extra nutrients, more than there's actually required to grow a greedy crop. So it's building up organic matter. So in essence, and this is the disadvantage of a market garden. Well, it's the disadvantage of farming in general. Everything you do is a trade-off. So every action you take, you lose something. You lose some form of functionality. And particularly with a market gardening, which in our current way of farming is highly intensive, certainly from a soil cultivation point of view. So you start to lose organic matter over time. Now, and we discussed this earlier on, the least you do, the more you maintain it. But the fact of the matter is, the more you if you cultivate, you start losing organic matter. So here's the situation at the moment. In the market garden, over a time period of 3, 4, 5, 6 years, depending on how often you cultivate, your organic matter levels are going to be slipping. The other side of the coin is half of the property is still in grass, clover, which is the orchard bit. That's where we're building up. The orchard is a mature orchard. It's actually overaged. So what we're doing now is turning part of the orchard. It has built up soil reserves in organic matter levels. Turn that into market garden. We market garden for 3 or 4 years, and then it goes back into a permanent crop again, and that builds up the soil organic matter levels. So my nutrient management is under intensive conditions. We know we go backwards, but we go backwards slowly because we compensate with compost and green manures and a little bit of fertilizer inputs that we create ourselves. So very slowly we're slipping there, but the other half of the property is building it back up. So that's part of the crop rotation, that's part of the diversity increase, that's part of the long-term management. And this is why I am a little bit taken aback about which sector do we belong in, because if you talk about sustainable farming, if you talk about producing quality, and if you talk about looking after the environment, the sector approach is never going to work. The infrastructure coming in behind this is not supportive enough. You never can create the diversity, you never can close the nutrient cycles. These things require a polyculture. And the sector approach, it just pushes people into a corner of monocropping or at very simple crop rotations. And that's what you see around us. It's very simple crop rotations, if at all any crop rotations, which means you can't do it unless you buy in a bag of fertilizer. And if you do, then you have to keep your crop standing up by using pesticides and herbicides and everything else. So it becomes a double whammy. So the only reason that we are able not to use inputs is because we're diversified. We've got extremely good levels of organic matter, because as soon as the organic matter levels drop below 4%, the resilience in the soil disappears and soil pathogens appear. And then you can't farm without fertilizer or without agrochemical inputs. And that boundary is somewhere between 3 or 4%. And well, there are a couple of, well, in fact that material is out there as well. I don't want to expand too much on it, but it's between 3 or 4%. So my job is to monitor that, and as soon as we hit 4.5% or 4%, we got to change the practices. The only area where we get that drop and is in the area where we grow intensively, which is the market garden, which is the annual cropping, which involves a lot of soil turnover. The reason why we have a lot of soil turnover is because we haven't been able to redesign and do things timely fashion, because there's no research about it. And to get started, you need to draw from the old society. So we have the old society equipment, which all evolves around those negative practices. So that's where we're at. We're moving away from it, but that's where we're at. Having said that, the produce and the environmental care is way better than whatever else is out there as being looked upon as organic. And even our friends within the biological movement, just looking at those questions, are struggling with that, because we don't have any serious inputs, which is part of this question, isn't it? What was the next part of the question?
So the whole question is, what is the nutrient management strategy of the farm, and how have you reduced external harmful and non-renewable inputs?
We have reduced them because we have the polyculture, which means if, well, people outside out there, they call something a disease or a pest. Very negative approach, really negative approach. All it is a population explosion of an organism or a plant that is not being kept in check because there's not enough diversity or not enough complexity, which is what comes with monocropping, because all of a sudden you have an enormous food source which is attractive to something. It will dive on there. Now it doesn't really care if we call it a pest or an aphid or whatsoever. It is going to happen in one form or another, and you can start a warfare against it, but the battlefield just changes. Now it's an aphid. You kill the aphid, next thing comes in. Now you can keep on winning the battles, but the end product that ends up in the supermarket has lost its vitality, has lost its integrity, has lost its cohesion, has lost its coherency. It's not fit to eat. So it doesn't make sense. So we have a polyculture that is designed to prevent population explosions. If we have them, they won't last. So that's in essence, that's it. Functional diversity. It's called functional diversity or complexity. So because we have created that straight from the start, we're doing pretty well. Having said that, there's one exception in the market garden, which is the white butterfly caterpillar, and we use Bacillus thuringiensis with that. And having said, but in theory we shouldn't have to, because if our watering system was slightly better, we could just water and make sure the plants are not under stress, and that would prevent the outbreak of the caterpillars as well. So it works two ways really. Plants, if they develop without stress, they have an internal strength, they fight off pests, what's called pests and diseases. They don't allow the population explosion to happen because they don't offer it as food. The only reason why they offer it as food is because their development has stopped and something in there starts to accumulate, mostly nitrogen or sugars. That's where it starts, yeah. And then it becomes attractive as a food source, because it's in essence it's garbage. It's a wasted resource. So ecology, food accumulation, even if it's in the plant, it's attractive for opportunists, which is what the caterpillar in a way is. There's a certain amount of caterpillar that is allowed to live out there in harmony with everything else. But if you have an explosion, it's because either of what's on offer is garbage. food, in a way, food for them, or they don't have any pest predators around. And the combination of the two and the balance between the two is what actually determines the success and the failure of a crop. It also determines the success and the failure of a crop to be edible, and it determines the success and the failure of environmental care. And I can, if you expand on that, it becomes a very long story, but that's in essence what it is. So why do we not use so we have BT basically because I fail to do my water management properly. Yeah?
But why do you fail to do your water management properly? What's the limit?
That's because of equipment limitations. I have one sprinkler irrigation which has to do 6 hectares, and that works in spring and it works in autumn, but in summer when it gets really dry, and if that prolongs, I can't carry it around fast enough. And the first things that suffer and unhappy, and coincidentally that ends up going together with when the white caterpillar is at its strongest, it's in January and February. The combination of the two just can't stay on top of it. So we use BT, but it's mismanagement. It's not mismanagement out of not knowing, but it's mismanagement out of not having the resources to deal with it. But it's still mismanagement. But we have a lot of these situations on the farm. It's our resources are lacking. They're not fit for purpose. Basically because nobody is offering that material because there's no market for it. If we would all stop feeding the dinosaur, now back to the dinosaur, meaning if we would all stop buying inputs, because that money it flows. That money you buy inputs, you just follow the money. It ends up with the corpses and the mega corpses. Sorry, I'm staying up to speak with the youth. That's text language for corporations and mega corporations, but I call them corpses. It sounds a lot better. So that it flows there, and so we keep that. If we keep on feeding them, it just means that they can have enough money to keep the spin going, which is misleading to us. And if we hear it often enough, we start believing it. And that's what we're dealing with. It's a social phenomenon that's become unavoidable. My neighbors that farm, they don't know any better, and it's not their fault. They hear it over and over again. This is good. This will increase your productivity. The story that it actually affects the functionality of the soil food web because it loses components, which is a fact. There's plenty of research material available for that as long as you go looking for it. And it comes from a variety of different angles. The fact that it changes that the functionality of the food complex and that you lose a lot of free ecosystem services gets no notion whatsoever, because free ecosystem services, they do not serve the corpses and the mega corpses. They move away from that. They don't want to give any lip service to that because it's not going to feed them. And as long as we keep on buying their inputs, they get the money to keep on going into spin. And it works together. I mean, you've got the corpses and the mega corpses feeding the politicians and feeding the scientists. It's a dependent relationship between the three, which is growing stronger and stronger still. But they're the dinosaurs, though. It's part of the old society. But we've got to get this sort of messages out. And that means we've got to stop this sort of thinking in sectors, and we've got to start thinking about polycultures and permacultures and microorganisms being the driving force with regards to feeding and caring for the soil, looking after the soil. And this message, people know this, and I can say this because what I've experienced is, if we do anything innovative, it really is our marketing strategy. We've tapped into people that have a feeling, they have a notion of food quality is being lost, the environment is overburdened. They have a notion of that, and we sell directly to them, and we enforce that thought. We haven't reached the phase of education yet, but we do enforce that thought. We give them a confirmation about their feelings and about the things that they think are wrong. We enforce that. We give them a confirmation with our communications and stuff. And because of that, and because of the quality of our produce, we are growing by word of mouth, not advertising. If you have to advertise to sell something, it means it's bad, because else you don't have to advertise it. You only sell bad things with advertising. Which is again part of that spin of the corpses and the mega corpses, really. That's what advertising is for. In a way, it's no good, but you need it. So with regards to nutrient management and nutrient recycling, a big part of it is not to have any bare soil, because it will green up, it will grow biomass, and biomass is next year's fertilizer. So we try and avoid working up soil and grow as much biomass as possible. However, we have a bit of a weakness in the system which we are trying to compensate, and hence the reason why we're here. It's, to keep a soil system going and keep nitrogen moving and phosphorus moving, you basically need animal manure. In an ideal world, we would make compost. But to make compost the way we want it, high quality compost, we need better equipment, and we need to be working together. We need to improve our infrastructure so that we work together with a couple of other farms. So as we can't do that, we have to compensate slightly. So what we do is, to keep nitrogen and phosphorus mobile, is we gather the little bit of chicken manure that we have from the chickens here. They're housed, and because they sleep in there overnight, so that gathers manure. So we take that, we go into the field and gather some sheep manure, and we go into the field and gather some cow manure, and that we put in a big tank with water, yeah, and we add a bit of molasses in there, and we add some seawater in there, so that we're not just supplying nitrogen and phosphorus, but also get the trace elements up to a certain ratio, because this is the main thing really is, you need the macronutrients, but at the same time you need the micronutrients. And increasing the micronutrients allows for a more functional microorganism community. Not going into that, but can be explained, not going into that, but this is, to me it's important, that's what we do. So we add seawater and we add molasses to get the trace elements up. Obvious reasons for seawater and molasses. Not going into that, but most people know that probably. So then we ferment it, so it's microbial activity. It's not as good as composting, but it works. And it means that with a little bit of product, with a little bit of manure, goes a long way that way. And it's just to keep the microbial community activated. And we use it mainly in winter, because in winter the microbes slow down, and which means there's no nutrients going into the soil solution, which means there's limited uptake by the plants. So then we start applying that stuff, just little bits really. It's no comparison to what NPK applications are, but it keeps the momentum, and it's a liquid fertilizer. Part of it's mainly taken up directly by the plant. The only disadvantage is that we have to do it more often. It would be nicer to make compost, because you apply that once or twice a year and it's done. But this, if you have a greedy crop in winter, you have to do it at least every fortnight. But it helps to keep the P mobile, and it helps to keep the phosphorus mobile, and it helps to keep the nitrogen mobile. And it's never an oversupply. It never is. Yeah.